Back in Portland, there was a quiet electrician who looked like a completely normal guy. He had a wife, kids, and the kind of life that made him seem calm, polite, and harmless. But inside his garage, he was hanging women's bodies from the ceiling. At one point, a police officer even looked right into that garage and still failed to notice that only a few feet away in the darkness, a dead woman was hanging there. Now let me take you to May 1969 in Oregon. A fisherman casts his line into the river, expecting an ordinary catch, but instead he pulls up the body of a woman tied to a car transmission. Then, just 2 days later, and only about 15 yards from that same spot, another woman's body is found. This time she is attached to a car engine. But to understand this, I need to go back a little earlier. January 26th, 1968. Linda Slauson is 19 years old, a regular young woman trying to make extra money by selling encyclopedias door to door. She walks through Portland with a list of addresses, knocking on doors and hoping to make a sale. Then rain smears one of the addresses on her paper, and Linda ends up knocking on the wrong house. A red-haired man with freckles answers and invites her in, saying he wants to hear about the encyclopedias. He leads her down to the basement, which already feels strange. But Linda goes anyway. As she sits on a stool and starts showing the books, he comes up behind her, hits her in the head with a wooden block, and strangles her. After that, he hides her body under the stairs, changes her into different sets of women's underwear, and takes photos. Then he uses her body in ways I do not need to spell out. He was deeply obsessed in a very disturbing way. And somehow it gets even worse. He cuts off Linda's left foot with a hacksaw and hides it in the family freezer. Why? Because he wanted to use it later to try women's shoes on it. Then he ties her body to a heavy engine part, drives to a bridge over the Willamette River, pretends to have a flat tire, and throws her into the water with the metal attached so she would not float back up. Later that same year, on November 26th, 23-year-old Jan Whitney disappears. She was on her way home for the holiday, but she never made it. Her car is later found near Albany on the side of the road. It is locked, and there are no signs of a struggle. It looks like the car broke down and she accepted a ride from someone. That is exactly what happened. A man stopped and offered help. He told her to get in and said he would take her where she needed to go. Instead, he drove her to his own house. While pretending to help her, he strangled John with a leather belt right there in the car. He kept her body for 2 days, photographed her, changed her into different lingerie, and did the same things he had done to the first victim. Then he removed her right breast and tried to preserve it with resin. He wanted to turn it into some kind of display piece. When that failed, he stuffed it with sawdust and pinned it to a board. As for Jan's body, he hung it from the ceiling in the garage. And this next part is one of the craziest details in the whole case. 2 days after Jan was killed, a driver lost control of his car and smashed into the garage wall. Yes, the same garage where her body was hanging. A police officer came out to inspect the damage, looked through the hole in the wall, and still did not see her because of how dark it was inside. Later, the killer told detectives, "That was close." That same night, he tied Jan's body to a piece of railroad iron and dumped her into the river. Then came Karen Sprinker, a 19-year-old student at Oregon State University. She drove to a shopping center to meet her mother for lunch while she was home on spring break. Karen parked her car, stepped out, and vanished. He took Karen to the garage, attacked her, forced her to pose in shoes and lingerie, and then killed her. Afterward, he removed her breasts to make casts, put a bra on her, and stuffed the cups with crumpled paper. Then he tied her body to another heavy engine part and threw her into the same river. But of course, the attacks did not stop there. On April 21st, Sharon Wood was attacked near the parking lot at Portland State University. She fought back hard and even bit his thumb. Then out of nowhere, a car appeared in the distance. That random moment likely saved her life. The attacker got scared someone might see him and ran. He got away that time, but he did not stop. The very next day, someone tried to pull 15-year-old Gloria Smith into a car near a school in Salem. Luckily, she escaped too, and she was able to give police a description of the man. Not long after that, another young woman disappeared near a shopping center. Her name was Linda Sally. She was 22, worked as a secretary, and studied part-time in college. That day, she had gone out to buy a birthday gift for her fiancé. A man approached her, flashed a fake police badge, and claimed she was suspected of shoplifting. He told her to come with him, but instead of taking her to a station, he drove her to his garage. There, he tied her up, then left her there, and went inside to eat lunch. While he was gone, Linda managed to free herself. But she still could not get away. She fought for her life, scratching and kicking at him. But he overpowered her and strangled her with a belt. After she stopped moving, he abused her body, and somehow this story gets even darker. In his twisted mind, he thought he was carrying out some kind of scientific test on her body. He tried to make it move again. He stuck needles under Linda's ribs and ran electrical current through them, hoping to make the body dance. Of course, it failed. All it did was burn the skin around the punctures. This was the body the fishermen later found near the river. After that, the investigation finally picked up. Detectives James Stovall and Jean Doherty took the lead. And honestly, this was one of those cases where the killer was not nearly as smart as he thought. The detectives started with the obvious. Since one of the victims, Karen Sprinker, was a student at Oregon State University, they went to campus and began talking to other students, asking what they had seen or heard. That is when something important came up. Several female students said they had been getting creepy calls from an unknown man. He claimed to be a Vietnam veteran and kept pushing for dates. He called himself Jerry. One young woman had actually agreed to meet him, and she gave detectives a solid description. Around 30, red hair, freckles, and slightly overweight. During that date, he acted deeply unsettling. Imagine being out with a man for the first time and hearing him bring up the two women already pulled from the river, then ask why you were not afraid. He might do the same to you. The detectives told the woman to contact them if he called again, and he did. On May 18th, she set up another meeting. When he showed up in the dorm lobby, he realized the people waiting for him were detectives, not his date. But he stayed unbelievably calm. He introduced himself and gave them his full name. He likely knew they did not have enough to arrest him yet. And he was right. They had to let him go. Still, now they had a name. And once they started digging, the whole picture began coming together. First, he worked as an electrician. and the bodies recovered from the water had been tied to heavy objects with copper wire. That was exactly the kind of material someone in his trade could easily get. Second, the locations matched too well to ignore. In January 1968, he lived in the same part of Portland where Linda Slauson disappeared. In November, he was commuting to work in Lebanon, close to where Jan Whitney's car was found. And when Karen Sprinker vanished, he was living only a few blocks away. Then Gloria Smith became a key witness. She was the same 15-year-old girl who'd escaped the attempted abduction on April 22nd. She remembered the car and said she could identify it. The suspect did not own that vehicle himself, but his mother did. On top of that, Gloria confidently picked him out from a photograph. On May 29, 1969, police finally got a warrant and stopped him on the highway heading toward Portland. At the station, when officers changed him into jail clothes, they found that under his regular clothes, he was wearing women's underwear. And honestly, that is the perfect moment to properly introduce him. This was Jerome Henry Brudos, known as Jerry. On the surface, he was an electrician, a husband, and a father of two. In reality, he was obsessed with women's lingerie and the bodies of dead women. The interrogation lasted 3 days in the old City Hall building. At first, he denied everything, but then he started talking. He began with his fetishes and moved on to the murders, describing the crimes calmly in detail and without even a trace of remorse. What shocked detectives even more was how normal he acted while confessing. He never lost his appetite even while describing things so horrific they made investigators sick. Later, from his cell, he called his wife and told her to burn all the women's clothes from his collection. Relfin refused, and that ended up helping the case. Police then searched the family home. They found copper wire, nylon rope tied in distinctive knots, photos of nude women, women's clothing, and lists of phone numbers for women's dorms. The strongest evidence came from the garage. Among the victim photos, investigators found one image showing a woman's body hanging from the ceiling. A mirror lay on the floor beneath her, and in the reflection, Brudos's face could clearly be seen. They also found the hook system on the garage ceiling and the strange cast made from a woman's breast. And this part is unbelievably disturbing. That object had reportedly been sitting on the living room mantel. His wife had seen it and felt uneasy, but Jerry told her someone had left it there as a joke. Somehow she believed him. Officially, investigators said she knew nothing. To me, one of the most horrifying parts of this case is that Brudos committed these crimes right inside his own home, basically beside his family. When he killed Linda Slauson, his family was home. He simply sent them out to eat, then carried out the murder in the basement while they were gone. And during his final murder, he left the victim in the garage and calmly sat down to dinner with his wife and children while a restrained young woman was still out there. On June 2, 1969, Brudos was formally charged. At first, only Karen Sprinker's murder, but soon charges were added for Jan Whitney and Linda Sally too. And to really understand all this, you have to look at who Jerry was before the murder. Jerome Henry Brudos was born on January 31st, 1939, in Webster, South Dakota. He was the younger of two sons. His family moved constantly because his father took seasonal jobs wherever he could. They lived in poverty before eventually settling near Salem, Oregon. His father, Henry Brudos, had a violent temper and was deeply insecure about his height, around 5'4". He was easily offended and quick to yell, though he rarely physically hurt the children. Jerry's older brother Larry was smart, calm, and successful. He did well in school and later became an electronics engineer. Their mother was proud of him. Jerry also understood electronics, but next to Larry he always seemed lesser, especially in his mother's eyes. His mother had openly wanted a daughter and did not hide her disappointment over having another boy. There are claims that she dressed Jerry in girls' clothes when he was little, but those stories were never really verified. Maybe that played some role, maybe not. Personally, I'm not sure I believe it. What does seem clear is that she was cold and extremely puritanical, almost disgusted by anything connected to sex. When Jerry was about 5, he found a pair of leather high heels with shiny rhinestone buckles and became fascinated by them. He brought them home, put them on, and showed them to his mother. She screamed that he was disgusting, then beat him badly and burned the shoes right in front of him. That is exactly why I have a hard time believing she ever dressed him like a girl. Criminologist Harold Schechter later wrote that her harsh reaction only made those shoes even more desirable to him. That is usually how it works. The more forbidden something feels, the more tempting it becomes, especially for a child. Around that same age, young Jerry once saw the daughter of family friends asleep on his bed. She was not feeling well, so the adults had let her lie down there and rest for a while. What caught his attention were her shoes. They were high heels, too. He became so fixated on them that he tried to pull them off her feet, but she woke up and chased him away. There is another part of his childhood people do not talk about very often. While Jerry was growing up in that miserable home, one neighbor woman became important to him. She was around his mother's age, but unlike his actual mother, she treated him kindly, like he mattered. He would go visit her and she would listen to him. Jerry later said that he sometimes imagined she was his real mother. But that did not last. The woman had diabetes, and as her condition worsened, she stopped letting children come over. Not long after that, the only real friend Jerry had, a girl his own age, died of tuberculosis. So in a short span of time, he lost the only two people he felt close to. After that, he was left alone with his increasingly dark fantasies. In school, he was sickly, isolated, and constantly dealing with migraines. He had no real friends. In first grade, when he was around 7, he tried to steal his teacher's shoes. She kept 2 pairs in the classroom and would switch them when her feet got tired. Jerry stared at those shoes during lessons, and one day he gave in. He stole the pair from her desk and hid them. The shoes were later recovered, but by the time he reached early adolescence, another fixation had developed: women's underwear. According to Brudos himself, that obsession started because of a neighborhood boy who had several older sisters. The 2 boys would secretly sneak into the girls' room, looking at, touching, and smelling their underwear. Brudos said those feelings were confusing but incredibly intense. He could not really understand them, but he kept wanting to feel them again. After that, he started stealing women's underwear off clotheslines and breaking into nearby homes where teenage girls lived. In reality, that kind of behavior shows up pretty often in the early patterns of future serial offenders. And he did not just collect those things, he wore them. One detail that stands out is that later on it turned out his mother's clothes never interested him at all. He strongly disliked her. It is also important to understand what shoes and lingerie meant to him. The experts who later studied the case, described it as a mix of fetishism and transvestism. Basically, he wanted to symbolically become a girl without actually changing his sex. He would wear stolen items in private, walk around in them, and photograph himself. For him, it created a feeling of control over something forbidden. Researcher Peter Vronsky wrote that those stolen items became mysterious, forbidden totems that triggered erotic arousal Brudos could neither fully understand nor explain. Around that same age, he began thinking about abducting. He even dug an underground tunnel near the house and fantasized about keeping someone there captive. At that point, it seems it was less about assault and more about possession, about having total control over another person. Later, when police searched his room, they found a huge stash of women's clothing and a pile of photos of nude girls. Jerry Brudos was sent to Oregon State Hospital for 9 months. There, psychiatrists diagnosed him with an adolescent adjustment reaction, sexual deviation, and fetishism. Later on, they even wrote that he had schizophrenia. Just think about that for a moment. Even back then, psychiatrists believed his fantasies were rooted in hatred for his mother and a desire for revenge against women. You can already imagine the kind of road that mindset could lead him down. And here's the key part. Even after all of that, the diagnoses, the disturbing behavior, and the fantasies, doctors still decided he was not a threat to society, so they let him go. To be fair, this was 1957, and his first murder was still about 11 years in the future. In 1959, Jerry joined the U.S. Army and worked as a communication specialist. He was later discharged because of psychological issues. Then, just a year after that, he carried out 2 more attacks. He tried to strangle one woman, but she survived. Another girl fought him off, and he ran off after stealing exactly what you would expect by now: one of her shoes. The next year brought another arrest. Police caught him on the grounds of Sackett Hall, a women's dorm at the University of Oregon. And yes, the reason was exactly what you think: stealing women's clothing. The wildest part is that when they arrested him, he was already dressed in women's capri pants, high heels, and women's underwear. Even with all of that, Brudos still got married. On September 30th, 1961, he married Relfin Schwindler. She was only 17 at the time and already 1 month pregnant. For the first few years, the marriage was relatively quiet, but not because Brudos had gotten better. It was mostly because his wife went along with his demands. She tolerated everything, and honestly, that may have been the only thing keeping him somewhat controlled. Here's what I mean. He wanted her to walk around the house naked, except for high heels, and he photographed her like that. Only after that would they be intimate. It was part of his ritual. On paper, that may not sound shocking if both people are into it. And maybe rituals like that helped delay his urge to start abducting women again. Hard to say. But there was another rule too. His wife was never allowed into the garage or the attic. Ever. He even put a lock on the garage. On top of that, she had to announce herself before entering and wait for permission. He claimed those rooms were for developing photographs, and if she came in unexpectedly, she might ruin them. Somehow she accepted that explanation. There was another moment, and this one is actually documented. One day, Brudos walked up to his wife wearing women's underwear. No explanation, no warning. He just stood there in front of her. She was obviously shocked, and he reacted badly. He had thought he had found a woman who would accept anything without judging him. After that, he stopped trying to explain himself to her and went back to living that part of his life in secret out in the garage. Then their daughter got older, and Relfin stopped participating in his rituals with the high heels and photos because she did not want the child to see any of it. On top of that, Brudos started putting on weight, and Relfin later admitted, "His physical appearance began to repulse me. They became intimate less and less. She spent more time with their daughter and friends, while he spent more time in the garage with his private projects. It was during that stretch, in the mid-1960s, that he started stealing women's underwear from neighbors again. And around then, his fantasies stopped being only fantasies. To the neighbors, though, he looked like the perfect family man. They described him as respectable, steady, and clean-cut. He did not drink, did not smoke, and barely even cursed. He seemed like a solid guy, a skilled electrician who made decent money. What is interesting is that Brudos himself had his own explanation for what he did. He agreed with the psychiatrist's earlier view that it all tied back to his hatred of his mother. During the 1969 interrogations, he talked about that pretty openly. He said his victims reminded him of a certain type of woman, and that he felt unable to stop himself. On June 2nd, 1969, he was formally charged. The first court hearing followed on June 4th, and Brudos was assigned 2 attorneys, Dale Drake and George Roth. At first, he pleaded not guilty, so the judge ordered another psychiatric evaluation. This time, no fewer than 7 psychiatrists reached basically the same conclusion. They said he had an antisocial personality marked by fetishism, transvestism, exhibitionism, and especially sadism. He had an average IQ, was not psychotic, understood exactly what he was doing, and was considered both dangerous and beyond rehabilitation. The trial was set for June 30th, 1969. But just 3 days before it started, Brudos changed his plea and admitted guilt in 3 first-degree murders. Why? Because by then, mounting any real defense was almost impossible. And the biggest reason was that photo with the mirror, the one showing a hanging body with Brudos's face visible in the reflection. At that time, Oregon did not have the death penalty. So instead, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms, though parole was still technically possible. At the same time, there was also a separate case against his wife. On August 7th, 1969, she was charged with first-degree murder after a neighbor claimed she had seen Relfin helping Brudos drag a woman covered with a blanket into the house. Brudos insisted his wife knew nothing, and that seems to have been true. In court, other witnesses contradicted the neighbor's story, and in October 1969, Relfin was acquitted. The couple divorced in 1970. After that, his ex-wife changed both her own last name and the children's, moved to an undisclosed location, and got a court order blocking any contact between the children and their father. Brudos claimed until the end of his life that he still loved her. She never spoke to him again. At the Oregon State Penitentiary, Brudos became a model inmate. He maintained the prison's computer system, helped install cable television, and took care of vending machines. Because he was serving time for sex crimes, other inmates attacked him more than once. But each time he refused to identify who did it. One strange detail is that he openly ordered shoe catalogs through the mail in prison. Staff treated that as a substitute for adult material, and nobody objected. Every 2 years, he had a parole hearing. relatives of the victims traveled there to speak against his release. On June 21, 1995, the board formally decided he should remain in prison for life. But Brudos still kept showing up at hearings, insisting he was no longer dangerous. Detective Jim Brintz, who visited him in prison, once asked him directly, "Do you feel sorry for the victims?" Brudos picked up a sheet of paper, crumpled it into a ball, threw it on the floor, and said, "That's exactly how much those girls mean to me. About as much as this piece of paper." As one biographer later noted, Brudos acted like he regretted nothing, even during the original interrogations. When he described the crimes, especially his fixation on shoes, panties, and bras, it was obvious he took pleasure in talking about it. The more he spoke, the more animated he became, almost like he wanted the officers in the room to understand his obsession. They did not. Detectives saw no guilt or remorse in him at all. The only person he ever truly seemed sorry for was himself, with some concern for his wife and children. What disturbed investigators most was the arrogance he showed while describing what he had done. It was as if he saw the women he killed as objects that existed only for his pleasure. Their futures meant nothing to him, and because that pleasure never lasted, he kept needing new victims to chase it again. At one of his final parole hearings, Brudos said, "This is not over yet. They can't take away my legal rights." But in reality, it was over. On March 28, 2006, Jerome Henry Brudos died of liver cancer in the prison infirmary. He was 67 years old and had spent nearly 37 years behind bars. If this case held your attention, subscribe and leave a like on the video. Thanks for watching, and take care of yourselves.